Back here on HQ Spotlight, the Big 12 Championship is going to be a battle at AT&T Stadium when number 11 BYU meets number 4 Texas Tech. The Cougars right now, the first team out of the college football playoff bracket. Tech, meanwhile, hoping for one of those first-round byes. The Red Raiders did get the win back in Week 11, but as we know, all of that goes out the window when it comes to Championship Saturday. Kickoff slated for 12 o'clock Eastern from Jerry World. And look who we've got stopping by HQ Spotlight, our college football analyst, Taylor McHargue, ready to break down this colossal matchup for the Big 12 title. Taylor, let's go back to Week 11 for a moment, because we saw Tech not only won the game, but they kind of dominated. They held the Cougars to season lows in points and total yards, among others. They forced them to turn the ball over. So when you go back and you look at that tape, what does it teach you? What does it prepare you for ahead of Saturday's game?
Yeah, that if you watch that game in the first matchup, the 29-7 doesn't tell the story of that game. That Texas Tech, they ended up settling for 5 field goals in that game, and BYU scores late to get their 1 touchdown of the game. It very easily could have been a rout, something in the neighborhood of 42-7 kind of game. And I think for BYU, that was the only time all season that they looked shell-shocked. And I don't expect, and I think BYU has talked a lot about, we had Kalani Sitake on this week to talk about, I think we learned a lot from that moment and what that environment was like, because remember, that had all of the hoopla going into that game. It had really the eyes of the sport. They were the early kick in that game. And I think for BYU going to AT&T Stadium, which I think we expect to be sort of a 2/3 or maybe even 3/4 home field advantage for Texas Tech, I think BYU will be better prepared. But the biggest thing that stood out to me when I watched that game back was BYU has got to have a better grasp on field position. And I know that may not sound like a lot, but with the pass rush and the defense for Texas Tech, BYU had so many drives where they were starting inside of their 20-yard line. And with a true freshman and Bear Bachmeier, they have got to figure out a way to get him some drives that start closer to midfield, get some takeaways, because that was the most tilted field that I've seen all season in terms of field position.
Yeah, like I said in the lead-in here, obviously you learn from those earlier meetings, but everything kind of goes out the window when it gets to championship week. And a big conversation that we've had across the sport, Taylor, of course, is all of the coaching changes that we've seen. There was a scare for BYU fans for a moment there. They thought Kalani Sitake was headed to Penn State. He says no. They reward him with an extension. Joey McGuire also gets the extension here. Take us inside the mind of a player for a moment, Taylor. How important is it in these big games, especially when you think about titles and CFP implications? How important is it to have your head coach on the sidelines?
Well, it's huge, and I think for Texas Tech, it was never really a threat. I think Joey McGuire's been very transparent about. He said, "I'm going to die in Lubbock," and hopefully that's a long, long time from now. But he said, "This is the last job I'm ever taking." So for him to get his 7-year extension, that was something that I don't think was a surprise to their players necessarily. Kalani Sitake on the other side, it was obvious. Penn State had shifted the focus to trying to get him to be the next head coach for Penn State, and we had him on again this week, and he talked about, look, I'm glad it's over with. He played at BYU. He's ingrained in this program, and this was huge for BYU to get him to stay there. And he talked a lot about, look, this was huge for my staff. It was huge for my players. A lot of what's in his contract was not just obviously his long-term extension and the benefits and incentives that went to him, but also his staff and increasing the salary pool for his staff members and his players in terms of the NIL. So this was, I would say, it's more impactful for BYU that they know they're not playing this game without their head coach, because as you've seen with Ole Miss and some other programs around the country, even your Mean Green with North Texas, there are programs that know their head coach is leaving, and I think that would have really negatively impacted BYU, probably more so than Texas Tech.
Yeah, especially when we've seen the mess. You mentioned Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin and who gets to go coach and all of the approvals and whatnot. It's been messy. I will say my mom actually worked with Joey McGuire when he was a coach at Cedar Hill High School in Cedar Hill, Texas, so we are big Joey McGuire fans, excited for him to be sticking around. I do want to stay with BYU, though, for a moment there, because I mentioned it leading in. They are the first team out in the penultimate CFP rankings here. Make a case for the Cougars, because you already talked about it. That loss to Texas Tech didn't really tell the whole story here. Is this truly a win-to-get-in situation for BYU, or what case would you make for them if this doesn't go the way they want it to?
It's the first team since we've had these rankings since 2014 that's been a power conference team that's been 11-1 to not be in the top 10. And I think for whatever reason, BYU is on the outside looking in. And I think I've said for the last 2 weeks, we are not punishing Alabama enough for that Florida State loss early in the season. Obviously, the easiest path for BYU is to win. And I think you'd see 2 Big 12 teams in. I don't think Texas Tech would get bumped. The scenario that I don't think enough people are talking about that I do think is a possibility, Alabama is also playing this weekend. If Alabama were to lose by multiple scores and they look sloppy, and now they're at 3 losses, and BYU were to lose close, last-second field goal, lose by 1 score on a neutral site, I don't think it's impossible that BYU could slide into that 10 spot. Notre Dame would shift up, and Alabama would be the first team on the outside looking in. I think BYU needs a lot of help there because, again, Alabama out of the SEC, or is the SEC really going to bump their runner-up in the conference and have an A&M and an Ole Miss that are in that didn't compete for it? I don't know. I don't know that it's that likely, but it's the best-case scenario for BYU, again, if they were to lose close in this game. I would have BYU ahead of Alabama right now, regardless. I think, again, Alabama, that loss to Florida State aged so poorly as the season went along, and BYU doesn't have a loss like that. Their only loss was to the top 4 team in the country in Texas Tech. But the cleanest path, again, for BYU, try to overcome this 2-touchdown deficit that they're dogs against Texas Tech and win, and then obviously they're in.
Yeah, that spread is looking real favorable towards the Red Raiders, but anything can happen in these championship games. Give us a matchup that you're watching, Taylor.
This front for Texas Tech, and it's one of the best in the country. And for Texas Tech, I mean, that's what they did an incredible job of the first go around. You talk about David Bailey and Romello Height getting after the quarterback consistently. And for BYU, Bear Bachmeier, if you get him in 3rd and long situations and allow Texas Tech to pin their ears back and come after the quarterback, that's best case scenario for Texas Tech. The other one that I'll call out, Parker Kingston, one of the best returners in the Big 12. He had a muffed punt fumble in this first game, and it was such a surprise because this is, again, one of the best returners in the sport. I think that BYU has got to win the special teams battle, and if Parker Kingston can steal a return on either kick return or punt return, that's something else. Pay attention to special teams in this game. So front for Texas Tech, getting after the quarterback, and special teams and Parker Kingston for BYU.
I want you to put your quarterback helmet back on for a second here and talk to me about these 2 quarterbacks, right? On one side, you've got a freshman who nobody really believed in or knew anything about to start the season. On the other side, you've got a guy who's worked his way up through the rankings to earn that QB1 spot. What do you think about the 2 quarterbacks playing?
Behren Morton is a West Texas kid. He's been on campus since 2021, and this is the first time Texas Tech's had a chance to win the Big 12. So it's not just this moment for Tech, but also they're led by a guy who kind of embodies West Texas football and is that, son of a coach. There's a lot there in how much Behren Morton means to Texas Tech. Bear Bachmeier on the other side, like you said, Haley, not only was he not the quarterback a season ago, he wasn't on campus until June. Remember, Jake Retzlaff was going to be the quarterback with BYU until everything transpired in the offseason. He ends up at Tulane. And now all of a sudden, BYU's got to rally around a true freshman quarterback. I think Bear Bachmeier has been, this is the most impressive true freshman performance out of a quarterback, I think, in my opinion, since Jalen Hurts, going all the way back to 2021. So for Bear Bachmeier, he's got to play better than he did in the first matchup, but a lot of that goes to his offensive line has to play better, and they need to help him in special teams and in field position because he's so good in the RPO game and play action, but that doesn't work in 3rd and long. That's the element where I think he's been so good this year is running the football, play action off of it. And Behren Morton has been so consistent, leads the Big 12 in completion percentage. And can't say enough about both of these guys. I think we ended up with 2 of the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks in this league squaring off against one another tomorrow at noon, kicking everything off on the Saturday slate, noon Eastern tomorrow in Jerry World.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. These 2 quarterbacks are electric. The defense as well is going to be huge on either side of this one. So all that leaves us for, Taylor, is a game pick from you. Who you rolling with?
I'm taking Texas Tech. I think this is really one of the best teams in college football. And I do think because of how they compete on the defensive side, I legitimately think, even out of the Big 12, we talk so much about the Big 10 and the SEC, this is a defense that is good enough to win a national championship. And I think they can block and tackle with an Ohio State, with an Indiana, with a Georgia. And for all of those reasons, I think you see it's a 2-touchdown spread for a reason. And I think you go back to how close most of the game really shouldn't have been in the first matchup against BYU. I think this is the most talented team in the Big 12, and I do think Texas Tech wins tomorrow and gets their first Big 12 championship.
We will watch it all play out. I know you're all locked in. Taylor McHargue joining us here on HQ Spotlight. You can catch Taylor on the pregame show for the Big 12 Conference Championship game. You can also catch him on CBS postgame, reacting to whoever wins. And any other questions you have, just head on over to the College Football YouTube page. They do such a good job of bringing you the latest information when it comes to these conference championships, the CFP, and so much more. Scan that QR code to get locked in.